Good afternoon, everyone. We got oh. You ready? Are you ready, sir? Oh, okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to call the 26th session of 11th Council special meeting on budget agenda. I'd like to call it to order. Can we please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of the United States? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. From the clerk office, can I get a roll call, please?
Carrington,
Present.
Goodman,
Present.
James, McGinnis, Nicholson,
Here.
Parker, Rutherford. Mr. President, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. At this time, could I get a motion for authorization of excused council members for this meeting for personal reasons? Councilman Parker, Councilman McGinnis, and Councilman Rutherford.
So moved.
Support.
It's been moved by Councilman
Goodman?
Goodman, I'm so sorry. And supported by Councilman Nicholson. Was that correct?
Yes.
I'll make sure. Get a roll call, please.
Goodman,
Yes.
James,
Yes.
Nicholson,
Yes.
Carrington.
Yes.
Four yeas, no nays.
Thank you. At this time, we're here to review this year's budget surrounding Department of Public Works. At this time, I'll turn it over to the mayor's office.
You're up.
I'm
Deputy
sorry,
Mayor
I'm
Stevens.
moving a little too fast. I apologize. Can I get a motion? And are there any amendments to the agenda? Hearing none, can I get a motion and a second for approval of today's agenda?
So moved.
Support.
Been moved by Councilman Goodman, supported by Councilman Brent, that we approve today's agenda. Any discussion? Hearing none, can I have the vote?
James,
Yes.
Nicholson,
Yes.
Carrington,
Yes,
Goodman.
Yes.
4 yeas, no nays.
thank you. At this time, we get to the good stuff. So please forgive me, this is my first time. I'm chairing the meeting, so please forgive me. At this time, Department of Public Works, I will turn over to Mayor Graham on his team.
Thank you, President Pro Tem. As I've done in the past, I'd like to ask Deputy Mayor Stevens to kick things off with the DPW budget items.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council. All right, so what we have in front of us today is the DPW, that would be the Department of Public Works. Underneath the Department of Public Works, you have engineering, road maintenance, and also the cemeteries. It is definitely worth noting that we are suggesting a number of changes to the Department of Public Works, mainly in that we are suggesting to bring in-house a lot of services, and in order to do that, we need to staff up the department. So as you look through this budget, you will see that in many places the budget for staffing this year far exceeds the budget for staffing last year. But the overall idea to that is that we will be able to provide much higher levels of service to our residents, and ultimately we will be able to provide that service at a lower cost at once we actually get staffed up. In some places you will say, well, wait a minute, Kafani, you still have budgeted for service to hire individuals, but you left money in the professional service lines, and that is just a cushion and a buffer to allow us time to actually ramp up and not have to come back to do budget changes in order to provide those services until we actually get ramped up. The other thing that I would like to point out is that unlike the other funds that you've looked at, this is actually a little bit more complex in that you have the Department of Public Works General Fund, and then you have the Department of Public Works Funds 202, 203, and 209. So this is actually the Department of Public Works funding source is actually made up of 4 different streams of funding. So the general fund, which is the fund that most of us when we talk about fund balances and are we in a structural deficit, or do we have a surplus, we're generally talking about the general fund, no pun intended there. Funds 202 and 203 are the major streets and local streets. And just to try and put some layman's terms on it, generally when we say major streets, the public may think immediately of a road like Telegraph, but actually a road like Pike Street, which is a major through street for sanitation and public works reasons, is actually a major street as well. But so you have major streets and then you have local streets, and local streets are very simple. For the most part, that's going to be your residential roads. The last fund that makes up the DPW is the cemetery fund. And so the city of Pontiac actually owns 2 cemeteries. We own the Ottawa Park Cemetery, and we also own Ottawa Hills. And so you have the historic cemetery right there on University, and then we have another newer cemetery that's a little bit further outside of the city. And you will notice that we actually pay more for the historic cemetery to be managed than we pay for the newer cemetery. And the reason for that is actually very simple. The historic cemetery is it's closer to its capacity, which means that the company that we pay to operate the cemetery does not have as many opportunities to sell plots and make revenue. So therefore, the delta between what it costs for them to operate and what they can bring in is larger there than it is on the other cemetery. So that's why we pay a little bit more for them to operate the historic cemetery than we do for them to operate the newer cemetery. Other than that, I think it is going to be fairly straightforward, and I am looking forward to your questions.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. At this time, City Council have any questions? Councilman Nicholson.
I just want to point out excuse me, Councilman, the cemeteries that the city owns it's actually Oak Hill.
Okay, sorry, thank you.
Not Ottawa.
Ottawa
That's
Hill.
next to in District 2. That's owned by the Catholic Archdiocese. Can you go through? I know. Hopefully everybody has this as well. The new org chart. Could you just walk us through the org chart and point out some of the highlights about in-source, outsource? I know there's some things are on here, but there's so much change. I think it would be good for us to be able to get an orientation on the org chart.
So actually, thank you, Councilman. I will defer to Director Cooley for that, but I will also note that on the org chart you see sanitation supervisor and then 2 new sanitation workers. So they made it onto the org chart, but they did not make it onto the staffing chart that was circulated. So that may have been the genesis of your questioning, but yes.
Good afternoon. So some of the things that we did when we looked at staffing up was adding, as Kafani had said, adding a sanitation superintendent and then 2 sanitation maintenance workers. What the plan would that be for was the sanitation superintendent would handle pretty much all things sanitation. So any debris that's on a city-owned lot on the right-of-ways, any issues with the sanitation company, currently GFL, that person would be handling all those calls and directing all that work. The sanitation maintenance workers, what the plan would be for them is hopefully clearing some debris out of dead ends. There's a lot of dead ends that have a ton of debris around the guardrails. That would be the everyday stuff that we would have them doing. And then, on the off chances that somebody's garbage gets tore open and it's sprayed all over the roadway, we'd have a crew to then go out and try to clean some of that up. Under the highway grounds and parks, we've added, it calls for 8 here, but I believe it's 7 actually is what we come to the conclusion of. That's a staff that we need to staff up to not only mow the parks, mow the right-of-ways, but also to improve our plowing services so that we can hopefully run our plow trucks around the clock. That'll give us enough employees to have 2 shifts to run a day and an afternoon or a day and a night shift to clear the roads quicker. The mechanic was moved off of there, so that's no longer there. Building foreman, currently we have 2 building personnel that take care of about 7 to 9 buildings, if you're counting the fire stations and some of the smaller park buildings. And it's just, there's a lot of overtime for the staff that we're currently using. They're very overworked, and we need to get better staffing with there. You'll see that there's a lot of stuff being brought in under engineering. Of course, we all know Abdul had left, and he had put together a pretty robust plan of trying to bring in some of the construction engineering ourselves, some of the plan review, some of the design engineering for our road projects, and then also get us some inspectors so that what you're seeing there is engineering techs will actually be our inspectors. They will be out on the roadways inspecting the road construction, different items like that. We also have in there engineering tech for doing GIS. That's currently an outsourced position now that would be better served in-house so that we could do training to current staff and also have somebody that's maintaining our databases.
So the positions that are floating that aren't connected, are those, how do those fit into the mechanic and the 2 customer service reps? Are those positions that report directly to you?
Yeah, the floating positions would be the ones that would report directly to me, but then also be a support staff for the whole department.
Thank you.
Any other questions, Councilman Nicholson?
No,
At
none
the
from me.
phone?
Thank you.
Just for the record, President McGinnis and Councilman Parker are here and ready to vote at 4:20. Thank you. I'm gonna turn control over back to the president.
Okay, was there other speakers waiting on the speakers list? I will correct the time to say 4:15.
Okay, all right.
I'll go for a
Councilman
second. Is there a way to see? I know we're spread across all of these accounts, which makes it sort of difficult. I'm wondering if you have the overall number of current to salary changes.
Councilman, that is a great question, and I was actually working on that just before walking in, and unfortunately, I did it on my computer and not on my phone. But if you give me a moment, we will have it for you.
And then I think my other question, to piggyback on that. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, I was
I'm
just
sorry.
going to say, but I think all of these positions, the deputy mayor said, are not on here because if they are, then I came up with 1,273,508
So
off of just this, but I don't think they're all here.
correct. So if you go just off of that, you're going to be missing 3 positions.
Okay. So there you go.
So we've got a mixture of, on the org chart, a mixture of positions that are coming from currently outsourced functions. I'm sure in some of those roles we have like dedicated resources at those outsourced, and some of them probably it's just an organization, so it's hard to like really figure out. I'm wondering if there's, much like we have with code enforcement, where we can really be able to go back and say this administration is adding X new positions to grow the ability to do what we need to do. Wondering if there's any narrative that we can put towards we're actually bringing things in house, but we're also expanding our capacity by X number of positions.
Yeah. So we can definitely provide a stronger narrative in that fashion for you. I will be able to say just right now, generally speaking, we're estimating about if once we ramp up in this first year, we're estimating that we should be able to reduce our engineering expenses, aggregate by about $700,000. And the way we're doing that is by having a city engineer, which we already had, but having an assistant city engineer, having our right-of-way inspectors actually be stepping them up to actually engineering techs, but then also having another assistant engineer. So bringing all of those positions and elevating the other positions with additional training allows us to do more more road reviews and engineering construction reviews instead of outsourcing them. And then it also allows us to respond quicker to those items so that we can move from project to project a little bit more efficiently. But we can definitely provide a deeper narrative.
Thank you.
Okay. Quick question concerning Department 445 drains. I see a 200,000 increase in that particular department, and what is the rationale in that? It goes from 300,000 to 500,000.
Can you, where is that?
Department 445 drains, Fund 9938.
Goes to the Oakland County Drains Maintenance.
Drain maintenance, Oakland County.
Yeah, it's
I can speak to that. Abdul was talking very well with WRC on the different drains within the city, the different operations that they had planned, and that's the proportion that they plan to assess the city for work in the drainage districts that are within the city that WRC handles. And then also, I believe a portion of that has to do with the culverts under Giddings Road, doing some engineering study on getting those replaced and upgraded.
I got a follow-up question in that, and I guess that particular department don't actually pays for itself when it comes to the billing process of what we pay for water and the city residents.
No, the storm drainage districts are totally separate from water and sanitary sewer.
Yeah, and if I could just add to that, that's because obviously sanitary sewer actually drains used water from households, whereas stormwater sewer collects surface water from rainwater, and so there's no way, nor would it really be proper to bill residents for just general rainfall that lands on the ground and then is ultimately collected through stormwater sewage collection.
All right, thank you. I guess I was trying to understand the overall of what we pay for as a city when it comes to what we getting billed in for. So,
yeah, the entirety of, if I may,
Yes.
Mr. President, the entirety of the water and sanitary sewer system in our city is now owned and operated by the Water Resources Commissioner. And that, of course, started under the emergency manager. And so we, which really means you as council, does have to approve any rate increases, and the Water Resources Commission periodically brings proposed rate increases to you. But what people pay in their water bill is for the clean water that comes to their house and for the sanitary sewer that takes all of the used water or wastewater away from their home. And like I said, all of that is managed through the Oakland County Water Resources Commission.
Councilman Nicholson.
Can you also give, I know as I'm going through it, I see it in a couple of different areas. Can you give any updates or speak specifically to the infrastructure purchases, things like, vehicles, or I know we've talked in the past, I don't know if it's going to come out of the general operating for, I know we're looking towards or buying street sweepers and those in the sewer vacs, or what is that? Depicted in the, like, I see one for 470,000 for vehicles under routine maintenance and roads, so we can give some, ideas about what sort of infrastructure we're going to be adding with the budget as well.
So, Councilman, part of that we project to pay for using the ARPA dollars that the city has received, and that is reflected in here. And I say part of it because there's only some of those items are eligible for ARPA expenditure, and some of those items are not eligible. Where they're not eligible, they're being paid for out of general fund and then the appropriate local or major street fund. And then Director Cooley has additional information.
And before we turn it over to Mr. Cooley, just to be a little more specific about Deputy Mayor Stevens' point, the items that can be funded by ARPA dollars are the mowing equipment for our parks, because parks, broadly speaking, have been deemed an eligible expense because of their connection to recreation and by extension to health. And as a result, things that relate to parks have been deemed to be eligible for ARPA dollars, whereas the bulk of the expenses, a little more of the expenses here, are for snow plowing vehicles, and those are not eligible for ARPA dollars, which means they have to be paid for either out of general fund dollars or Act 51 dollars, the dollars that come from the state for purposes of road maintenance.
Where will we see that revenue, the move of that revenue from ARPA to the general fund? You mentioned that that's depicted here.
Yeah.
So I see an expense, but where does the revenue get assigned in what budget?
It will be a transfer in 445. It is a transfer into 445.
Anything further at this point?
No, I think they wanted Director Cooley to talk about some of the infrastructure
Yeah,
ads and vehicles.
just to follow up on what the mayor was stating, we're trying to look at bringing in a couple of used large dump trucks to get our fleet back to 8 dump trucks. That way we can section off the city easier with 2 trucks tag teaming. There's also some engineering vehicles that need to be bought with the new engineers. Some plows put on some of those vehicles so that we can handle some of the parking lots, the city-owned buildings, different things like that. There's some money in there for a loader so that we can do some trash cleanup ourselves with a clam bucket on the front of it, because we don't currently have that. And those where those dollars are allocated.
Am I missing, Deputy Mayor? Am I missing the? I still don't see that revenue transfer. Is that in the paperwork that was provided to us?
It should be. I'm looking for it myself.
Okay.
As soon as I
Okay,
put my
yeah.
finger on it, I will let you know.
Mr. President, we can move on.
Oh.
Thank you.
Is that, he said 445 drains, is that where we're transferring it into drains? Department 445?
No, fund. Sorry,
Oh.
it is. It's not in this group. It's in the capital improvement
Okay.
budget.
Okay.
Councilman Parker.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just have a question on, department number 447. Stormwater services. It went from 6,000 to 100,000, something like? If my eyes play tricks on it. Page 204, Department 447 Engineering, Stormwater Services,
Right.
that's line 13.
So it's under the engineering department. One moment.
And I recognize I'm late, so you may not have gotten there yet.
No. We are moving in whatever order the council has questions. All right. So engineering, and then which part of engineering?
The line number 447-806-001.
Stormwater services, it shows $6,000 was what was amended for this current year, 38,000 plus actualized through April, projected up to 51,000 for the balance of this fiscal year, and then for next fiscal year, we're looking at $100,000. So the Giddings drain was invoked potentially for drain fund, but it's possible that it would be helpful for us to know what that represents and the planned increase.
All right. So I am now at engineering 447, and you said the drains.
The stormwater service.
I see. 806. Okay, here we go. Got it. Yeah. So yes, that would be the drains that we talked about previously, and specifically the culvert by the high school, by actually it's by both high schools, Giddings Road. Beyond that, I would have to go back and look deeper for you.
Anything further at this juncture, Councilman Parker?
No, sir, not at this time.
All right, so it may have been addressed already, and please inform me if so, but right now the Department of Public Works is using leased facilities off of Joslin Road. This budget here, under Public Works Operations, I see services, building, and land rental. Is that what I should anticipate, what was both budgeted and actualized for this current year? And is it sort of the same continuation as the plan for the next fiscal year, based on what physical space, what property or facilities is Public Works operating out of?
So the continuation is the contingency. We are actually meeting later yet this week on a different plan that we hope to be able to amend this budget that will actually allow us to no longer lease facilities but own facilities.
How many years has this lease situation been the scenario for Public Works?
Oh, at least 10? 4? Before that?
It was a signed 5-year lease, so it was 4 years with a 1-year add-on to it. Before that, fire station on South Boulevard is where we were at. Before that, City Hall parking lot.
And so are we in that 5th extension year of that current lease?
Yes.
Yeah, that will take.
What we're
effect
going into.
like June 1st.
Okay. And so, short term, we should expect that considerations will be made to see if there's a more effective scenario for
Correct.
Public Works operations, and then the bottom line of the budget, bearing in mind that it takes time to be strategic. So we can look forward to hopefully positive news to come. Recreation supplies in the next department, 818, Parks Grounds Maintenance. I see $70,000 is what is budgeted for recreation supplies for parks. A fraction of that, under $2,000, is what's been actualized to date or anticipated for the balance of this current fiscal year. But are we thinking that $70,000 is the appropriate amount, since that's what's budgeted? What are we looking at for recreation supplies for parks, and is there any context on what might have hindered the previous administration or the last few months to actualize those plans?
So for previous administration, I will definitely have to defer to the person who was here to talk about that. Going forward, however, you will see that in the immediacy, meaning this summer, we are looking to the fact that we will still have to do some outsourcing, and then looking into next summer, we hope to have been able to ramp up such that we can take care of all of that ourselves in-house.
Yeah, that's right. To put a finer point on that, we already have a third year option to our grass cutting contract that we exercised, knowing that spring was upon us, number one, and we need to start mowing the grass. But number two, that it's going to take us some time to actually hire in the 5 additional labor 2 positions so that we have adequate staffing to actually do the lawn mowing and the snow plowing in-house. So the way this is crafted is that we'll do the last year of outsourcing with the grass mowing in our parks, some of which is this current fiscal year, and we just adopted an amendment to help pay for that, some of which will be in the coming fiscal year starting July 1st for the rest of the season. But that all of the grass cutting will be in-house by spring of 2023, and all of the snow plowing will be in-house beginning with the next snowfall.
Does that have an impact on the park recreation supplies for parks? What might that represent?
So currently, the reason why that money wasn't spent was staffing issues. We didn't have staff to get them type of supplies and get repairs done to it. But if you remember, we just went through a budget amendment where we moved some of these dollars over to the grass cutting.
Understood.
So that's why I believe the mayor was
Okay,
speaking
that's
on that. As
yeah.
some of that money got moved down for grass cutting to get us through the rest of this fiscal year.
Was the $70,000 like a placeholder, or were there specific recreation supplies that were sort of on a to-do list or to order list that sort of can be revisited, or it was more so let's put a placeholder 70 grand, that's what we hope to be able to engage? Because we also see down at $50,000 parks and neighborhood projects, again a very small fraction was actualized. Was this more aspirational, and was this a newer approach? Like, for example, if we went back 2 or 3 years ago, would we see much in those line items, or is this sort of a new intention for this current fiscal year that due to various factors hasn't been acted on?
I think it was, to be 100% honest, I believe it was a placeholder for each year. You will find that in previous years, there's been the same type of movement where we've bought some supplies, but there's been some budget amendments to move that to a different line item to take care of mowing or tree cutting or something along those lines. And then same with the parks and neighborhood projects. That was the previous administration's fund that they used to get supplies for some of the parks cleanups, some of the mulch, the sand, those type of things when we were doing cleanups.
Deputy Mayor Stevens?
And then on both of those items, as we move forward into this new budget coming up, to use your words, they are in fact we would call them aspirational, in the sense that just today we had our youth rec managers start. We don't yet have dedicated parks staff, but we know that once we do have dedicated park staff, they're going to need funds to work with, and so these are funds for them to actually be able to enact something.
And to add to that a little bit, as Kafani's stating, as we start ramping up for our mowing crews, this will give them funds to replace swings, basketball nets, different broken items on the play sets that we hadn't had the staff to do previously.
So they would not only be identifying those needs, assessing those needs, and flagging them for swift action, would they be the ones tactically doing those improvements?
Depending on the repair. Some of, if it's a small enough repair that we could handle in-house, yes. If it's something, larger thing that's under a certain guidelines, then we may have to bring a contractor in to do that work.
Right.
Examples being concrete pouring, we would outsource. Replacing nets and hoops and backboards is something that we legitimately could probably do in-house.
I do think, and there's no expectation just in terms of the ramp-up time that's required, but as the years progress, that the council would absolutely want to see something that's looking comprehensively in terms of assessing what the greatest needs are,
Yes.
the greatest sort of aged, recreation supplies and infrastructure, so that way we have a sense of comprehensively what are we looking at, and then being able to say, how can we surgically afford from different respective funding sources, and then have it keyed up if a granting opportunity comes up, if as grants and philanthropy is fully operational. I mean, these are really potent and attractive enhancements for external funding sources, but just so that way when we're looking at the budget in the future, we're knowing, okay, this is why we're putting this dollar amount here.
Well,
because
no.
we practically anticipate that this year we will do X, Y, and Z. And so there's not too much need to do, sort of reverse crystal ball action. But going forward for future years when we have that capacity, where we have recreation staff, we have, sort of parks point person to be able to help run point on that. So that way when we're making these resource decisions, we're doing it with that fuller view.
So that is completely agreed. And again, as was stated, the idea is that once we actually find someone and get them in that position, they need funds to work with. So this is at least giving them something that they have on hand to go back and look at. So we do have a parks master plan. We do have at least something of a capital improvements list. And so for them to, when they look at that, if they have something budgeted, they can say, oh, at least I do have some money that I can go forward and address items, as opposed to having a position and them having no ability at all to do anything because there's nothing funded in the budget.
And a follow-up point, I think it really will demonstrate the value about what we talked about in recent days in terms of the organizational structure for recreation. When it comes to youth recreation, senior activities, and parks, to have that leadership infrastructure so they can help cut through and make those decisions. They can help provide that guidance. Because I imagine many of us have professional experiences where a lot of us might know things that need to get done, but to have that decision-making structure in place where they can give the green light, yes, we have the money for that. We know where it's going to come from, and we're on sure footing to be able to make those decisions at sort of the departmental or the project-based level. Did I see a hand? Pro Tem Carrington, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you, President McGinnis. In both funds, major streets and local streets, I see surface maintenance, temporary asphalt, and permanent asphalt. And I don't see much increase in those departments. Actually, I would like you decrease those areas, and I'm trying to wonder why would we have so many issues with our local streets.
So I'll take a stab at that, and then Director Cooley can follow up if need be. So in both of those areas, we've done a good deal of construction last year, and so we are spending what we have available in those areas. So in order for us to spend more, we would be digging deeper into fund balances, in which case we just, in those particular areas, Director Carrington, we don't have additional fund balance to go deeper, correct?
I mean, it's all going to depend upon what's completed in this fiscal year and what ultimately.
Could you please go to the mic since we were recording these hearings?
But so I believe what Director Carrington is going to tell you is that depending on how much of that money we actually go through this year, we will not have the funding in those fund balances to spend deeper in the upcoming fiscal year.
So just to follow up on the deputy mayor's point, the current
amounts that are in the recommended budget, we're trying to maintain a certain level of fund balance based on the spending that is included currently in the recommended budget. Ultimately, that's going to be contingent upon where we end up the current fiscal year, as there are some capital projects and how much of those projects get completed and what remains uncompleted going into the new fiscal year, which will provide additional funding potentially, because we will then have some funds available that would be above the required or desired amount of fund balance. So it's really a situation where that's just based on this year's budget and the budget that has been presented for next year. Depending upon what goes unspent this year, those funds would be available for additional spending in the current in the upcoming fiscal year.
All right, thank you.
Councilman Nicholson.
So, I mean, I agree. I think if we're not going to be in the position to do a lot of major, I mean, clearly we've got time is really probably, while money is not is an issue, but also time. The only thing that we have are these temporary opportunities with asphalt. So I think regardless of whether or not there's money in that coffer to move from one year to the next, I think we need to consider resourcing that in a different way. One question that I have regarding the amounts that are budgeted, so I know we brought up before the Water Resource Commissioner fee in 445, both in 202 and 203. One, we went from 675, we're reducing that to 500,000, and then the other one we have 100 and currently has spent 250, and we're budgeting a full 500,000. 500,000 seems to be a number that's in all of those categories. Is this what was the rationale or the why is it 500,000, 500,000, 500,000? Is that
So
Which line are you on?
I can speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, 202, 203, 445. Both stormwater services.
If you go back to the major roads, so the 202, you'll see the stormwater services, and then the services contracted construction. You'll see 675 and 150. So currently that is they're kind of combined, and we're doing work side by side. So it's the cleaning of the storm drains and also billing of catch basin repairs, different items like that.
Okay.
So what we did was we split those out and put a $500,000 into both of those funds. And part of our MS4 permit, we have to do catch basin cleaning every 5 years. So that we're back to the start of that we got way out and ahead of it, so we haven't had it the last couple of years, and we need to start that program back up. But with that happening, we wanted to separate out the actual repairs that needed to be done when they come in and actually have to cut the roadway open, repair the catch basin, anything that's been sunken or has a sinkhole next to it. So we try to split those services up in both local and major roads.
So we anticipate some major movement in the catch basin area.
Yeah.
Okay. So when those storm water services, those big projects like that even pays for the repair of the roads, those intersections when you're cutting out that's pavement work and everything.
Yeah, and that's why we move them dollars under construction services, so they would be better audited on the work that we're doing.
All right, thank you.
I'd like to recognize Councilman Rutherford as present voting at 4:45 p.m.
Smells fabulous.
Others that wish to have the floor. Legislative Council Sharp.
Yeah, currently we acquire the majority of our salt from the Road Commission of Oakland County.
So my question is just, since that has now come into play, is that gonna be in the new budget in terms of, are you still, allocating the same amount of funds for the salt, or is that now going to be reduced? Do that happen for the next fiscal year, or?
So currently, we will have to still buy from the road commission because all municipalities buy through the state of Michigan on their, they do the negotiations to get a good salt price for all the different municipalities, and you have to put your allocation in typically by the end of March, early April. So we've already missed that deadline to be able to build our own salt dome and do something with that. So we would have to ramp up and have that be part of next year. Yes.
Thank you. Others who wish to have the floor? Mayor Grimo.
I know I had to step out briefly, so I don't know, perhaps Mr. Cooley already touched on this, but there is an important advantage to us owning our own salt dome, which is currently our trucks load up at the Road Commission Salt Dome in Waterford. And the downside to that, the primary downside to that, is that they charge us for they don't let our drivers load that salt, and they insist that their own personnel load the salt, and then they charge us for that personnel's time in loading the salt. If we had our own salt dome, our drivers could load their own salt, is my understanding, and we would not incur this additional expense of paying someone else to load the salt. And of course, while the Road Commission's loader, if you will, is loading the salt, our driver is just sitting there doing nothing because they won't let us have him load his own salt. So if we had our own salt dome, we'd be paying our driver the same amount of time, but instead of just sitting there, he'd be loading the salt into his own vehicle, so we wouldn't be paying someone else. They also charge us more for the salt, is my understanding at the Road Commission, than they pay for the salt. Is that accurate?
Others who wish to have the floor? Councilman Nicholson.
Curious what the process looked like with the cemeteries. Was there staff involved in the budgeting process like our internal directors?
Yes. Well, was their staff involved?
Yeah. Like the woman that we see every week at council meetings that comes and introduces herself from Oak Hill Cemetery and
So not directly.
okay.
Indirectly, consultation, yes, but not directly. Like, I did not sit down with her. I sat down with our director.
Mm-hmm. And is she, who do they report to? Okay. Okay. Great. Thank you. I just wanted to make sure on
Was that
Tuesdays we're not going to hear, I didn't know about this meeting tonight and what's going on with my budget. Okay. Very good. Thank
Was
you.
a hand raised?
Oh, yeah, so they report to Director Cooley.
So the Department of Public Works is the overseer and the implementer of the Covenant Cemetery Services contract.
Correct.
The contract runs through 2023 at this point. And what would be the department fund where we would see that actualized? So we'd go to Department 273
So,
Cemetery Ottawa Park and 276 Cemetery Oak Hill.
Those are both in 209.
Okay. And so if we're looking at the cumulative, we're looking at $292,000 for expenditures for Ottawa Park and $282 for Oak Hill for a cumulative impact for $575,000 plus.
The revenues are 616.
So the revenues are 616, and I know it's a relatively hot button question, but the perpetual care fund during the emergency management that was redistributed and repurposed to help resolve the city's financial emergency 10 plus years ago, correct?
So I am going to say I cannot affirm that. I do know that as you said, it is a hot button topic, and the city's perpetual care fund was the target of emergency management, but ultimately I am not sure where that landed in his ability. That was something that I know the emergency manager looked at touching. I'm ultimately not certain what the courts allowed him to do.
I know that there was discussion of attempting to sell off the city's municipal cemeteries, and that was ruled not permissible. So the second best solution was the outsourcing of the operations. So that's happened for a number of years through various different service providers. The question that residents have offered is what became of the money that was, paid into by the burials over the decades and various other revenues? Was that naturally exhausted for the purposes of administering the cemeteries, to facilitate the cemeteries, or was funds diverted that would have otherwise been there for perpetual care, for deferred maintenance that definitely is accumulating at both of them? Mayor Greimel?
Well, I do want to just begin by acknowledging it's a really important question, because state law does require that cemeteries maintain adequate funds in terms of their receipts for purposes of maintaining cemeteries in perpetuity. And so it's a very important legal question. I don't know what the actual answer is, but Mr. Carrington, are you able to speak? I know you haven't been here at the city for very long, but since you've arrived, has there been a fund containing proceeds from past burials that the city has had a fund in relation to this? And how long have you been here as well, for the council people who may not be familiar with the exact date?
So, answering the second question, I've been here for approximately 18 months, and I am not aware of that. That's something that has not come up during the time that I've been here. Haven't seen anything pertaining to that. I'm sorry? Okay. Yeah. Are they in the balance sheet or? Okay. So we'll have to go pull that financial information. It's I believe it may just be sitting in the balance sheet, but we haven't been. I haven't seen any activity from that in particular.
But Mr. Bawa, do you believe that it's in a separate fund?
In 209.
In 209. Okay.
Yeah,
Wherever.
if you look, there's a fund balance total on the very last page of our agenda tonight that does show the beginning fund balance and the ending fund balance in that appropriation fund 209. $1.4 million.
Okay.
1.46.
So that may then answer the question.
I've seen reference that there are funds in perpetual care. I just was curious if there is dispute in terms of the total where that stands. But even moving forward, it'd be helpful to know what some of those state requirements might be, so that way we know when we're in a position to deploy perpetual care funds for perpetual care in terms of Ottawa Park and Oak Hill Cemetery, respectively. I've received correspondence from some community members about Ottawa Park specifically, in terms of the roadways for the community's benefit. Ottawa Park Cemetery is owned by the city of Pontiac, by you, the taxpayers, and were established by taxpayers that came before us, but it's located in Independence Township off of Dixie Highway. My understanding is that they'll be participating in the public hearing, but they were flagging deteriorated roadways as one item of concern for Ottawa Park, and as well as the need for section markers there. I'm sure there are other needs that they might have identified, but the list is even longer for Oak Hill because, for one, it's just that much older. But we have seen it firsthand. It's within the city's boundaries. The deteriorated state of the tree care and what costs that might trigger when it's not dealt with is what's been identified by many. I see in the 2018 memorandum, and thank you for supplying it because it's relevant to this conversation, but that it's really what the city is providing above and beyond that is landscaping maintenance and winter maintenance, which is snow plowing and salt. And so, there really isn't funding that's really set aside for really constructive, penetrating landscape maintenance, just because of how vast that cost is. But Just want us to be able to look and respond comprehensively when those questions arise so that we know what we're dealing with.
And I
Mayor
do
Brown.
have a meeting coming up with the company that maintains the cemeteries or operates the cemeteries, to be more precise, in about 3 weeks. And this is something that, again, we've had a lot of urgent matters, and so this has been on our radar screen to look into, but we haven't yet gotten to it. But again, I think the meeting's coming up on June 15th, and so if I'll certainly dig into this more before then. We'll certainly find out exactly what the city's legal requirements are in terms of preserving these funds and making sure that we're taking proper care of the cemeteries. If you have any questions that you'd like me to ask of the company that operates the cemeteries, just let me know before June 15th, and I'd love to bring them up in the meeting. Or if any council members would like to be in that meeting, let me know that as well.
Thank you, and I'm pleased to hear that. Obviously, we'll all benefit from a stronger understanding. There has been the challenge of multiple different contractors doing that work. I have heard positive feedback in terms of Covenant doing the best they can with the resource limitations that are there. But I think it'd be helpful, again, if they have a running roster of that deferred maintenance. What are we looking at? And I anticipate that they probably have some of that or could quickly start shooting it off the hip. Community members, above and beyond that, there are community members that have intentions and aspirations for Oak Hill Cemetery to be more adequately serviced and supported. It is a real asset and a jewel for the community. Not only does it have the practical functionality and still a working cemetery, but it was designed intentionally to be a public space for the community to come together and celebrate and reflect their loved ones, but it's very park-like. And I think that it's in much better shape now than it was a decade ago. So the trajectory is good, but there's a great distance further to go. Councilwoman Rutherford?
So I'm late. So is the DPW director going to get back up here, or do you want me to ask the
It's still actively, depending on the question, yeah. So you can pose the question and whomever's got answers offers it up.
My question is, how many more customer service agents are budgeted for this year? Newer ones or different ones or more? How many y'all have that's going to be budgeted?
I don't believe, I'd have to look at the org chart. I don't believe that there are any new.
There is a red box.
There's a red box, so I want to know how many. And
There would be just the one.
So one presently and one added.
so for 60,000, how many people stay here?
61,000 people.
61,000. We only gonna have 2 customer service agents in DPW. I'm just asking because don't you think that it would be more efficient to add more than one?
So
Because
the org chart that you see in front of you is what was requested, and so we believe that should get us to where we are trying to be.
okay.
And I can just talk a little bit to that, as well as we are also in communications with GFL to take over a lot of the customer service for sanitation, which will cut down on a lot of the calls that are coming in to the office. So that's why we feel if they take over some of those services, that us having 2 customer service reps will help us answer the calls better.
I guess I'm asking that because of the current situation, the callback and things of that nature, the complaints that I get is that people can't get this effect. And it's not taking a dig at you, it's just speaking what it is.
No, I understand, and I'm
Don't want
not
nobody
taking
to
it
get defensive,
personally. It's a staffing issue. It's not just the customer service representative staffing issue. It's a staffing issue through the whole DPW. They cannot call back to items they don't know to speak of, and that's stuff that we're working on with putting a new superintendent in place, working with our supervisors, and getting the field staff to make them calls back the way they should.
Got it.
So, Councilwoman,
Oh, go ahead.
so if I may, your point is very well taken, but it is not just in that one position. So you have that one position. You currently have Director Cooley is researching technology improvements that will actually better help us categorize, organize, and respond to complaints, and also let the public know where we are in response to those complaints. As an overall city infrastructure, we have the liaison person that we are hiring to actually manage those incoming calls and work across departments to make sure that when a complaint comes in, it actually gets to the right person and is followed up on. And then finally, as Director Cooley said, a lot of the complaints that we currently receive are directed specifically toward our sanitation. And so right now, because of the antiquated nature of our contract, it is actually, believe it or not, more efficient for those calls to come to us instead of going to the contractor. Because what we have found is that no matter how many times we have told the contractor to instruct their staff to speak off of a different script for Pontiac, their staff is not doing that. And so that causes additional confusion. So as we move forward, we are looking to totally move all of that sanitation complaints back to the contractor.
So I get that, and that sounds good. I'm just asking from like immediately what's going to happen, because we got 4 new labor jobs, well, 8 altogether. If I'm not in the red, if I'm looking at that, I don't have mine with me. I apologize. So it's 8 jobs. So I just think that we should, if we're going to do 8 laborers, we need to have 3 customer service. I just think it needs to be more efficient because of the way that the calls come. I normally have to, just to make sure I clear, dot my T's and cross my I's. I CC Tim, I CC Al, and I feel like it should be a simpler way to do that. And also, it needs to be simpler when y'all update the IT system, as far as like when people have complaints. Sometimes people don't get those tickets through. I've made tickets oftentimes. So I'm just trying to make it more effective and efficient for people who are not who are not familiar with the computer, and or who do not feel like the computers are friendly to them. So that's why I'm asking.
So we strongly agree with you that we need to improve our responsiveness to residents, really in all departments, but including and especially DPW. So your observation is a really important observation, and we agree with it.
All right.
I would just say that actually adding some of these additional positions should help address the problem and not exacerbate the problem. So adding these labor 2 positions actually should help address some of that responsiveness, even without any additional CSR folks, because one of the bottlenecks in getting back to people, not the only one, is that we don't have, and by we I mean the CSR rep, doesn't have enough information. And so having more staff in the field should help actually give more information to the CSR folks so that they can better respond to people. So you're right that customer service, resident responsiveness is of paramount importance. But I would note, and again, some of this is what the deputy mayor already said, but we're doubling the number of CSR people under our proposal. We're also hoping to reduce their workload by getting GFL, the city sanitation contractor, to do more of the call intake themselves. In every other community around us, that's the case. Pontiac's been an outlier. So just if we can get them to do that, that alone would free up CSR time. Then we're doubling the number of CSRs. And then in addition to that, we are, and we haven't yet brought somebody on board in this position, but the community concerns specialist will help with intake as well for the entire department and help follow up with all CSRs in the departments. And then finally, as we build out some of these positions, we should be much faster at getting to and addressing resident concerns. And the faster we get to resident concerns in terms of dispatching labor 2s to do maintenance, the fewer calls we'll have, because a lot of these calls are repeat calls, as you can imagine, when people's concern hasn't yet been addressed. So I think you're absolutely right to focus on this issue, but I would recommend that we put in place these measures, see how that goes over the next few months before we add another 3rd position.
Okay.
But if it's still not being addressed, then we can add a 3rd CSR position if it's still necessary at that juncture.
Okay. I just have another question for DPW. Signs. Highland, is that Howland or Highland? Howland.
Howland.
Howland. There's no parking signs on all of those things. I wanted to know, how do we find out how to get signs for residents that have handicaps? Need handicap parking. What's the timeline to get that done? And explain to me step by step, because I have a particular individual who is trying to get something done on their street because both of the people are handicapped. They have people to pick them up daily, but there's a no parking thing in front of their house. So when when the transportation van comes, they oftentimes have issues. And so how do we rectify that? And what's the steps when we want to try to change a no parking to handicap parking or something? How do we do that?
So, Councilwoman, that specific item has been addressed earlier today. We can talk about it more after the hearing, but it's not a general budget.
Okay. That's not bad. I didn't know. And
No,
so
absolutely.
I'm asking because it's my chance. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
What budget, though, would we see the cost to us for contracted sign replacement, street signs, et cetera?
Signs are under engineering, correct? So they're going to be either in 202 or 203.
Oh, so even though it's not just a question, not about that, but Astorwood sign, is that under engineering as well? Because that needs to be repaired as well.
So it would be under 202 or 203, local streets or major streets, depending on if it's a residential street or.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Pro Tem Carrington?
Yes, thank you, President McGinnis. Just want to temporary go back to Cemetery, Ottawa Park, and I was looking at services building maintenance.
Yeah.
In 2021, 2022, they budgeted for 150,000. They barely even had 18,000 in building maintenance. When you guys talked to that particular department or company, did they say a reason for that?
So I will let the director answer that question.
Yes, so that falls under our department, because we still do the building maintenance on the buildings. We still take care of the trees when there's issues with the trees, all those type of items. There is some planned building maintenance out there. There's some roof leaks that we're working on both the pole barn and the mausoleum.
Ottawa Park?
At Ottawa Park, correct, yes. So some of those funds will be spent before the end of this fiscal year, but it's just currently, it's a staffing issue. We haven't had the staff to get out there, get it contracted out and get the work done.
And I guess my follow-up is that I know it's been a lot of concerns about making sure that these cemeteries have section markers and those things. So none of this money could be repurposed to get that done? Especially when the budget is coming in way under what you guys projected it.
Yeah, and so, we have had dealings with the Oak Hill Cemetery for those markings. There hasn't been a big request to our office previously for the markings out at Ottawa Park, but we are not opposed to using these funds to do the markings at all.
A follow-up question. There is a facility in District 6, but near the border of our two districts, where my understanding is that the city owns the property and it's on University Drive. Has there been any determination made if that facility will be demolished or in some way remediated? It's where I believe that lawnmowers are stored. I often can drive by and see
Yes.
coffin type structures stashed out there.
That's the maintenance building that's there at the two intersections of University and University 59 proper. Yes, there's money in the capital improvement fund to have that building demolished and hopefully build a smaller pole barn there to house the backhoe and the lawnmowers that are there. The building's currently in disrepair and can't be fixed.
So the intention is for this coming fiscal year that is an action that is intended.
Correct.
So gives us a sense about Ottawa Park and that building maintenance. Thank you for that. That was a question I had as well. What does other professional services represent in this instance? It looks like 30,000 the current fiscal year at both Ottawa Park and Oak recommended to go up to 80,000 for Oak Hill, and 50,000 for Ottawa Park. Is that contracted services for trees or some other work what does other professional services represent for these particular departments?
It's a place mark for both cemeteries for if we have something come up, like you said, if there's issues with some dead trees, or if there's issues with the well out at Ottawa Park needs some work done to it, the wellhead's leaking a little bit. So it's these other professional services will pick up those smaller items, heating, cooling. There's some bathroom repairs that need to be made at Oak Hill Cemetery, so that's where we have those itemized under the other professional services.
Is it a scenario, is it a working situation now presently with the current contractor that's providing these management services, where if they have a need, they're able to elevate it to you and you are in a position to be able to make decisions? I understand that you're newer in the interim role, but is there a sense that moving forward it'll be more smooth for that sort of strong and swift decision-making where the budget line items allow?
Yes. So currently, when they have different items, different issues at the cemeteries, they have a couple of different DPW employees to contact. If it's a building issue, they get with Larry Robinson, our building superintendent. He generally will take those quotes and bring them to me, and then now we'll have a more smoother transition of, yes, it's within the budget, let's get that work completed.
So the building superintendent role, they're the point person for all of the municipal facilities across the city, well, and beyond, even into Independence Township where applicable, correct?
Yeah, any building that the city owns, they're basically in charge of.
That's helpful. So to Councilman James' conversation that we had at a previous budget hearing, where we were talking about sort of the ideal scenario where multiple facilities are knowing what our challenges are, what our sort of needs assessments are. There is, at least through the Department of Public Works, there's a superintendent role whose job is at least on the implementation phase of facilities improvements, repairs, maintenance.
Yes, and he will work with the engineering staff to do a facilities assessment to narrow down what each one of the buildings needs. It's actually why we put another position in for the building department, so that it would free his time up to allow him to better serve the role as a superintendent doing these type of work, doing this investigation work, so that we can start making improvements on the buildings that we need.
Well, thank you for that strategy. I think that'll bear fruit for assessing and improving the many municipal facilities that have a great deal of deferred maintenance. Others that wish to have the floor, Councilman James.
I'd like to ask about the Clinton River Trail that's currently being redone. Is there ongoing maintenance in this budget?
So the only maintenance that I believe we have in the budget for the Clinton River Trail and also for the North Spur is the mowing, for us to mow the trail back, to keep that down. Currently, there's nothing in the budget to update any of the maintenance that's happened. I don't believe there'll be anything that'll be needed over this next fiscal year, but rolling from there on out, there will be needing to be, to have some type of that stone base to put it back out there if any potholes arise or whatever on the trail.
There does need to be some kind of, oversight. Once that trail officially opens, it's going to be very, very busy. We're going to see trash out there. We're going to see other, need for trash receptacles, maybe not to resurface within this next current year, but we definitely are going to need some kind of a maintenance plan, and therefore some kind of a budget, hanger that says, this is where those funds are going to come out.
So for items like trash and different items along those lines, that's, we're staffing up for the laborers for the parks as well that are going to do the cutting. But we also are asking for those 2 sanitation positions, and those sanitation positions are going to move throughout the city to do different items. If there's, if we get a call and there's a park that's got a lot of trash in it, those sanitation employees will go over there and start cleaning up that trash. If there's something that needs to be checked once a week, once every other week to ride that trail and make sure that, the trash is picked up or the receptacles are empty, that'd be something that fall under them as well.
Okay, so that's gonna be a part of their job description, these new
Correct.
people that are coming out? Okay.
Correct.
But is there going to be a place marker for the maintenance of the Clinton River Trail?
So, Councilwoman, if I may, what Director Cooley was responding to is that in this current fiscal year, there are not plans to make additional upgrades to the trail based on what has been done previously. But in the fiscal years following, that is something that is going to absolutely necessarily be in the budget.
I understand, but you're saying upgrades, I'm talking maintenance.
well,
Day-to-day maintenance.
So when I say upgrades versus day-to-day maintenance, Director Cooley was describing day-to-day maintenance as, trash collection. When he talked about replacing the gravel base, that would be the type of maintenance I think that you're referring to, that he is saying is not in this fiscal year, but will be in the following fiscal years.
Other discussion? Pro Tem Carrington.
Yes, first, I'd just like to thank your department for clearing Harper Street, that area for dumping, as well as Linda Vista. But I do got a question. I think myself and the mayor had mentioned, I had talked to you about some barriers, concrete barriers right there at Harper. That whole little section that people are I want to know where we can put that in the budget so we can make that happen, so we can stop some of that dumping in that area.
Yeah, I don't know that there's a existing budget line item where concrete barriers, for example, would come out of. We do have a number of areas in the city, as you know, Director, where there are openings that, and this, depends on the circumstance exactly how this manifests itself, but where there might be a dead end of a road, but vehicles are able to jump the curb and drive back some distance into the woods or into a field and engage in dumping. And so I have had a number of conversations informally with council people or with residents about the possibility of putting up some barriers to try to prevent people from accessing some of these areas where dumping occurs. And that's what President Pro Tem Carrington's referring to. And I don't know if we have a line item in the budget where those items would come out of. I don't know how much these barriers, say a concrete type barrier, costs, but eager to hear your thoughts on the subject.
Yeah, so I don't think there's a specific line item for us to purchase them ourselves to place them out there. That's something that we would have to find if we had the ability to put them out ourselves. But under both of the local and the major roads, it would fall under other contracted services. That's something that we could hire one of our contractors that's currently on contract to take those out, place them in place and barricade those roadways off. One things that we have found is we have done that in a couple of different areas, and it's a very hard to completely block that area off because they'll jump the curb and drive down the right of way, or they'll drive on private property to get out and around the barriers. It does help prevent some of it, but it's not something that we're opposed to doing to help out in different areas.
Well, in this situation here, it's actually on a local street. It's right in the neighborhood.
Right.
And actually, the city has a sign saying that we have cameras. Of course, we don't have cameras. And it's really a section that goes into Mark Twain. That's a city street. So
Yeah,
I think that
it's right there, Joslyn and Linda Vista at the corner there, correct?
Actually, not that area. It's actually on the opposite of Omar and Harper.
Okay.
On the opposite side of entering into Mark Twain. So I think if those barriers was there before you can even get into that area.
So is that the area that we just did the debris cleanup
Yes.
from? Yeah, so there was some barriers that were back in there, and we brought those barriers out as far as we could. There's still a driveway there on that dead end, so we couldn't bring them all the way to Harper, but we did bring them up to the driveway as close as we could, so we did move those barriers to try to stop some of that dumping.
Okay, thank you. And also, as we talk about this, what about cameras? Because I know the last council talked about cameras as well, and this council continues to talk about cameras for high dumping areas.
Bless you.
So are we going to make sure we have this in the budget?
It's not currently in our budget proposal. I know President Pro Tem Carrington that you and I have spoken a fair amount about it, but don't leave yet, Mr. Crowley. Wanted to get your sense of the cameras, Mr. Crowley. I know you and I have talked about it, and I'm wondering if you can reflect on the experience that you had with the kinds of cameras that had been purchased, 2 years ago now, something like that, a year and a half ago. You know, I know that there were a couple of concerns that you expressed in terms of their effectiveness, and I think summarizing the concerns, I would say there were three issues. One is the resolution of the cameras and whether they're high enough resolution to identify cars that are engaged in dumping, either by make or model or more precisely by license plate. Number two, whether they have the ability to transmit those images in real time. And third, whether we had the staffing capacity to actually monitor those images in real time. I think those were the sum of the concerns that you expressed. But why don't you elaborate, and I get the sense that Deputy Mayor Stevens has some thoughts to add as well.
Yeah, so exactly what the mayor said. We had, when we had done the alarm systems on the building, the company that had did this alarm system had looked at some remote camera systems for us, and it was just not feasible for us to be able to put them in place. So what we did at DPW is we bought these, they're higher density trail cameras, to a lack of better words, and they work off of a cellular service, and they kind of piggyback each other where they can send pictures back and forth to each other. We never got to the point of actually getting the cell service to put the cell service on them. What we did was we tried to, we installed one actually here at City Hall, up on one of the light poles, just to see how good we could view traffic within City Hall. It was kind of pointed at the general area where the recycler dumpster was, just to try to see it. It doesn't do a real time, it snaps pictures. You would catch a lot of front bumpers or rears of cars, like the rear quarter panels on the side. There was a couple of times it would catch some license plates, but they were real grainy when you would try to zoom in on them to get a proper view of them. We actually moved two of them to Bodett Park last year to try to see how they would work within the park. We put one on a telephone pole up pretty high. We had our streetlight contractor put it up for us. They put the other one up in a tree pretty high by the main parking lot. When we went back to get the computer chips out of them to take a view to see what happened, the one that was put in the tree is actually gone. Somebody had taken that one. Somebody had climbed the tree and taken that one from us. When we viewed the
Or
pictures,
a bird scooped it up, flew away.
yeah. They're a pretty elaborate system. They had a solar panel to them to charge the battery, so it is something pretty elaborate that somebody would have had to climb the tree to get down. They were strapped in there pretty well as well. But like the mayor said, it's not something that you can receive real time until we go to some type of cellular service. When we haven't really got to the point of trying the cellular service because of the graininess of the videos just on an SD card that we were pulling from them. And then, as the mayor said, we would have to actually send somebody out with a bucket truck or something to go up and change out the SD cards. The cameras just didn't, that design of camera just didn't seem like a viable option to get us any type of information we were really looking for to get enforcement. We also talked with the sheriff's department on if we had real-time cameras, if they could have somebody monitor them, and they said that was not something that they had the staffing for, that they could not monitor the cameras throughout the city.
Well, I guess my concern is that, we use cameras to show people going to the moon, and you tell me that we ain't got cameras that are efficient enough to catch someone dumping. I'm just kind of not understanding that.
No, I'm not stating that there's not a better camera out there.
If you pass a stop sign, they can get your license plate. So I'm trying to you know, I'm just not understanding the hesitancy of making sure that we have some good cameras in high dumping areas.
Deputy Mayor Stevens.
So, Council Pro Tem, you are absolutely correct. The flock system would be a wonderful example of the idea that there are definitely better cameras out there. The experience that the city had was that the cameras that we tested out were not of a high enough quality. We have not yet gone to say, well, let's move up to the next level quality camera because of staffing issues. Even if we moved up to a flock quality camera, the issue is there is no one who has the capacity to monitor the output of that device. And so we are first trying to get our house in order to handle the items that we have on plate. And then again, so sometime this year we will be bringing on a parks manager. Every summer we do have the ability to bring on the summer youth workers. And so that definitely could be something that we use to help monitor these cameras. But as of right now, those summer youth workers, from the standpoint of being parks wardens, don't currently have a home and a director. So to go full force and buy a camera system and implement it right now would be us buying technology that is just going to age. So instead of buying technology and allowing it to age, we want to make sure that we actually have the capacity to use that technology before we let it just get old on the shelf.
Well, you know, I guess I look at it from two sides, right? Currently, our staff going out and cleaning up dumping is definitely takes up a lot of time, right? That means you guys can't do other things that you need to be doing. Also, it's a source of revenue if it's implemented accordingly, and we start fining people from dumping. It kind of pays for itself. If you look at the city, we got one of the worst dumping issues in Oakland County. So I'm just looking for ways that we can start trying to reduce some of this dumping. Because basically the worst feeling is to work all day and come into a neighborhood that has trash at the corner. That's not a good feeling. And I'm talking from a standpoint of being a citizen that actually has cleaned this up for 12 years. So I can just imagine this people have been doing it for 20 and 30 years, how they feeling right now. So we just got to do more for our residents, and that's what I'm trying to do, just to make sure that we can help reduce some of this, because some of it is local residents are dumping, and external people coming into the city is dumping as well. So we just got a double-edged sword that's happening in our neighborhoods, and as a homeowner, and as someone that really cares, that's going to actually get out and work and clean it up. We want to make sure that our neighborhoods are the best we can make them. That we make sure that Pontiac's a place that we want people to live, want people to raise their kids here, want people to love this city like we are. So I'm just hoping that we can do more around this area as we move forward, because in the past we haven't. We need to get the best cameras possible. You know, if you say those don't work, let's get some price ranges so we can discuss it. But we don't even have any price ranges right now.
Councilwoman Rutherford.
Two things. The camera was returned, FYI, because I brought it in. The camera that was missing, it was returned.
Was it?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
That's the first thing. Number two, the way that we do the camera issue, the same way we find grants for everything else, I'm sure that the people you have that's grant writers, Mayor Grimer, we can find some funding to pay for this or outside source, because what's going to happen is there's a reason why I'm bringing this up. District 1, District 6, and District 7 are the most, gets all of the trash, especially Bodette Park over there and especially off by Branch Street. Every week I get a call. So my question is, we're paying, I don't understand, first of all, why we can't use one of the community liaisons to monitor the cameras if we get the cameras, because we're paying them a whole bunch of money to work in our city. So surely we can use one of the community liaison officers they just created to monitor the cameras. Could we not do that? Someone? Anyone?
You asked a couple of questions.
Yeah,
so
I was I'm asking.
I want to begin by saying that we have a very serious dumping problem, not just in districts 1, 6, and 7, but really throughout the entire city.
Okay.
So I want to really be clear that we do have a very serious dumping problem. I would say, just to further amplify President Pro Tem Carrington's point, that we have hands down the worst dumping problem of any city, at least in Oakland County. There may be some remote townships where there's serious dumping in farm fields or woods in the middle of nowhere. But in terms of cities, we have, I think, by far the worst dumping problem of any city in Oakland County. And so we take that very seriously. To President Pro Tem Carrington's point, there's no question that there are better, more sophisticated cameras available. I think the biggest question, and this gets to some of your comments, Councilwoman, the biggest question is, okay, we record the data or we transmit the data, then what? And depending on how many cameras we have, if we want to act on that information in real time, meaning someone's dumping right now, we need to act on it right now by calling a sheriff's deputy to go out and respond. That requires really 24/7 monitoring. And if you have, depending on how many cameras you have, you need more than one person to do it. One person can probably effectively monitor, I don't know what the number is, but 10 cameras. But you have more than that, and you need more than one person, is my guess.
Right.
So it's not a simple thing to make sure that they're being monitored in real time. Now, if we're not talking about real-time monitoring, and we're talking about recording video footage so that if a dumping incident occurs, then you can go back and look at the footage and try to ascertain who was responsible for the dumping. That's a little bit easier in terms of staffing. The challenge there is making sure that the camera is positioned in such a way that it picks up the license plate. Because with the flock system, which I know has been mentioned, in that case, it's positioned along roadways where you know that the traffic is moving within specific designated lanes. If you're talking about a dumping site or location, it's normally broader than that. It's normally a broader space. And so trying to position, you really need multiple cameras in that space at different angles, at different heights, trying to make sure that you hope that if somebody dumps in that general vicinity, that you get a glimpse of their license plate in the video. So you end up having to deploy a lot of cameras in one specific location. And obviously we have a lot of locations around the city where dumping's an issue. So it's a very complicated question, and to be honest, it's probably beyond at least our expertise in the executive branch. It's a situation where if we're serious about doing this, we really need to hire some sort of a professional consultant who has some expertise in surveillance in terms of what it would take in terms of number of cameras, positioning those cameras, and monitoring those cameras. And we're open to doing that, but I do think the first step is having somebody who actually has expertise about what it would really take.
And cost. I mean,
Right.
because what the ultimate thing we want to nip in the bud is dumping, is blight and neglect in our neighborhoods. And, thinking about Harper, part of the reason why that dead end exists is because, well, it used to go through. I mean, they didn't build it as a dead end necessarily. They were either anticipating that the road grid was going to be connected, or more likely what happens in Pontiac is that a development happened or a new road configuration happened, and it's created this new dead end. So before M59, some of the neighborhoods in District 7 wouldn't have necessarily had a cul-de-sac, maybe because of the height elevation, but if you go back far enough, some of the worst dumping happens with areas that have become dormant even when they weren't initially built that way. People will, try and find the easiest route to an area where they think it's neglected, not monitored, just free reign. And I would want us to invest the resources to whatever end helps prevent that. And it might be that it would be more bang for our buck that we just take that area that's a dead end, or, you know, kind of, and we no longer keep it a dead end, and it makes it, you know, connect the curb cut and vacate that land and sell it to the nearby property owner or resident. I'm open to many strategies that ultimately prevents this from happening, because it's capitalizing, and these dumpers are taking advantage of what they think are neglected areas. And that's part of the reason why it had happened, because they were neglected, and then dumping begat more dumping, neglect, you know, led to more neglect.
And it becomes a vicious circle, to your point, and that's absolutely true. The other thing I want to emphasize is this is exactly the right conversation to have when it comes to dumping on public property, whether it's parkland, whether it's right-of-way in a street or a dead-end right-of-way. When it comes to private property, our position is that it is the private property owners to maintain and safeguard that property. And so if somebody is dumping on private property, that's not the city's problem in terms of devoting resources to prevent it. It's that private property owner's responsibility to monitor their property and call law enforcement when dumping occurs. Our responsibility as a city is, to the extent that dumping occurs on private property, regardless of who's doing that, if the owner of that private property is not cleaning up that dumping, we're going to issue a citation to that private property owner, because it's the private property owner's responsibility to monitor the property, prevent dumping from happening on that property, and when dumping occurs, to clean it up promptly. So I do want to just make sure we're, to the extent we're exploring cameras, that we're focused on deploying cameras to monitor public city-owned property, not the property of private property owners, because it's their responsibility to monitor that property, and they should be going out and buying their own cameras to do that if they don't want to get repeated citations for blight on their property.
And then it's our opportunity to enforce that code for the private property.
That's right.
But I don't.
Councilwoman Rutherford.
I don't want to beat the dead horse, but some of the places.
If the dead horse is dumped on city property, we
Okay.
keep going.
But some, there are some elderly people who just simply can't afford all of that, and I'm looking out for the jets for everybody. We have people who own property that are elders that are getting stuff dumped on, and they just don't have the funding for that. So I just feel like I'm saying it openly. I feel like because we have a grant program, the grant department that you're creating, we can try to find different funding for that too, because we have a working class city. We have a huge elderly population, not just employed to them. We could figure out a way to find funding to help them people, to help those individuals with those needs, because it becomes a major issue when it's on a main street. And so that's all I wanted to. That's really what I would like to see that happen, because you'll say, okay, we gotta find them or whatever we have to do. At the same time, there's a huge elderly population who owns their property and simply don't have the funds to do it anymore. And it's like the sidewalks. There are people that own their property and try to decide, well, the sidewalk's been lopsided for 40 years. So at what point do we give them a helping hand? Are we empowering them? Are we causing them more problems? That don't feel right to me.
Well, you're right, except it's my observation that where those locations where dumping regularly occurs, and we all know, or most of us know a lot of locations where that's the case, and that's really what we're talking about when it comes to deploying cameras. Those aren't typically a small residential lot.
No.
Those are situations where it's either vacant property, again, setting aside city-owned property. It's either a big vacant piece of property held by a land speculator who owns it and is waiting to develop it or sell it, or it's a commercial property that's abandoned. Those are the properties I'm talking about, where we're going to cite the property owner if somebody else is dumping on that property and they're not promptly cleaning it up. I'm not talking about, the mom and pop small lot house owner.
Okay, I missed
No, you're good. But one thing that we will immediately explore is this is a very helpful conversation, because I think we all agree on the seriousness of the problem. What I'm going to explore is whether we can find some grant funding, and I hate to say this because I know that consultants consultants sound like, oh, you're sending it to committee. That's where good ideas go to die. But I do think it would help us to get some real expertise in this area, because we're not the only city across the country that has dealt with dumping. This is a big problem in the city of Detroit. It's a big dumping all across the country, and primarily in older central cities and in rural areas as well. I mean, that's really where dumping occurs. And it doesn't typically occur in relatively high density suburbs. And so I suspect that there are people out there who could advise us on proven strategies to reduce dumping. And I'd like to see if we can get some grant funding to hire somebody like that,
Okay.
who could come in and say, hey, these are the ordinance you should adopt, or these are the ways to effectively deploy cameras, or these are the ways to effectively deploy barriers, because this is a really important issue, and I don't personally have a good sense of what are really the proven approaches to address it.
I
So-
thank you for that.
Yep.
Thank you.
We have hands from Nicholson, Goodman, and James. Nicholson.
As we talk about sidewalks, I know there's CDBG dollars for sidewalk replacement. A good portion of my district does not qualify for that funds. I do, though, have streets full of residents who are 100% interested and willing to have that assessed and fix their sidewalk. They're begging for it. With this new structure, and I mean, clearly that's a big project. That's a whole nother task. There's work that takes to do. Between this and whatever financing arms, do we believe that we will have the structure to be able to respond to those sorts of requests moving forward?
We actually do, and that is actually something that we discussed just a few weeks ago, having the city go through and make an assessment of all the sidewalks and what needs to be fixed, and then being able to reach out to the residents and say, if the city contracts this work, we can do it at X per square foot. If you contract this work by yourself, it'll be X plus Y.
Mm-hmm.
And giving them the opportunity to take advantage of our bulk purchase cost savings.
Mm-hmm.
But that is definitely something that we are trying to put together now.
And the logistics of just handling it, knowing which contractor can handle it.
Mm-hmm.
It's in the rotation.
Yeah, I think the majority, I mean, similarly to Councilwoman Rutherford, there's a lot of the legwork, right, is the problem. So I think they'd welcome that opportunity to say, if you want to use the city, because if you use the city, of course, it likely will be a higher fee, but they won't have to go through the process of permitting and inspections and that is sometimes so over someone's head that just has never done something like that before or is a senior citizen. As it relates to senior citizens today, I've called every single nonprofit there is to find out about how someone can get support in grass cutting. I have a very well-intentioned senior citizen that wants to mow her grass, cannot physically do it themselves, and can only afford $20 per cut. Nobody offers it anymore. And the dollars that were with CDBG, that were at OLSA, she may qualified for because it was more of an individual assessment rather than a neighborhood assessment. That is, those are no longer available. So as it is right now, this person then, gets a couple $100 or maybe even $1,000 assessed to their taxes if we start cutting it, and then, eventually can't pay their taxes, eventually loses their home. So over things like grass cutting, I think we really need to figure this out. The residential piece, is there an agency that we can connect with? Does that have to be an act of us saying we want to put dollars towards that? What's possible?
Yeah, so this is actually something that I can speak to directly from my involvement in nonprofits. The Area Agency on Aging previously provided funds to Oakland Livingston Human Service Agency to provide that type of service. The issue really goes right back to what you said about this particular individual who could only afford $20. So there was a set amount that the area agency was willing to pay. and the amount that they were willing to pay did not cover the cost that OLSA had for actually providing the service. So OLSA, in this particular case, actually had to use their general fund dollars in order to supplement the service, and that was not a sustainable activity. Since then, area agency has not been able to find a different provider because they are not willing to cover the actual cost of providing the service, and that's why you've not been able to find a nonprofit to provide that service, because they have not been able to find a funding source that actually covers the cost of the service and the overhead fee that they incur to actually schedule the service. So to take it a step further, so then what do we do? If the city would like to take their CDBG funds and add that on top of any other source of funding, we could do that. We just have to remember, one, that CDBG funds are, a finite source, and that every CDBG dollar that you spend on one activity is a CDBG dollar that you do not spend on another activity. And for those who are in the audience that were not previously with us, CDBG is Community Development Block Grant funding. The other thing to remember is that Community Development Block Grant funding is an income eligible item. So even if the city were to determine that they wanted to do that, there would be individuals in the city who would not be eligible for that source of funding.
Councilman Goodman, withdrawn. Councilwoman James.
Yes, I have a question on the Department 818 Parks Ground Maintenance budget. Do we have mulch replacement in the playscapes? Is that realized in the budget? Because that's an ongoing issue that, as you know, we're constantly requesting mulch to be purchased for volunteer work, replacing the mulch in the playscapes, and I don't see any particular. I'm not sure if the 101-818-780-005 would be where those supplies would come from. I'm looking at the current budget, and what's been spent is only $1,400. So that can't be the mulch. That can't be where the mulch was coming from.
Currently, the mulch that we just did when we did the community-wide cleanup that we bought for I think we got it for 2 or 3 different parks.
Yeah.
That come out of the parks and neighborhood projects. That's 101-818-808-000.
Okay.
So that's where that, and I don't believe them receipts have shown up in this to reflect in this amount yet.
But is there a dedicated fund, Mr. Cooley, for where those would come? Because that is an ongoing expense that
Yeah, they'll continue to come out of that fund there. As we
Okay.
need mulch, we'll continue to pull it from that fund.
Okay, also bathroom upgrades and repairs. We had talked about Bodette Park, of trying to get that bathroom reopened. Is that realized in the budget?
So there's nothing currently in the budget for any of the bathroom renovations at any of the other parks. That's all going to be part of the facilities assessment that we go through with an engineering firm to tell us exactly what dollars it's going to cost to upgrade these buildings to get them back into service. Currently, I don't believe we plan to open the bathrooms until we have some type of parks attendant or somebody at the parks while the bathrooms are open.
I want to add to that a little bit by saying I think, Councilwoman, this would be a good use too when it comes to capital improvements in the parks, to look at using ARP dollars, because these are, it's my understanding, as I said earlier, eligible uses for ARP dollars. And as we've noted before, including in the cover letter for the budget when we sent it to council a few weeks ago, that we're going to be coming forward with some infrastructure improvements and other proposals to utilize ARP dollars. We generally have not done that as part of this year-to-date year-to-year operational budget proposal, except insofar as those expenditures were directly related to hiring additional staff, like the labor to staff and bringing mowing of parks and snow plowing back in-house, for example. But as we've said, we are planning in the next, I think when I sent the letter, it was the next 2 or 3 months. Now it's the next couple months here, because a few weeks has gone by already, to bring a proposal for the use of ARP dollars to council. And so this, I think, would be a perfect use of those in terms of infrastructure improvements in the parks. The other thing I would note is that, and this is, I think, why Director Cooley said we really need to make sure that we have adequate staffing for the parks, because it doesn't do any good to have restrooms there unless we've got the staff to clean them, to try to prevent vandalism and that sort of thing of those bathroom facilities in the parks.
Councilman James.
The ARP dollars that we're talking about, are we talking about the 10 million that we put into the general fund, or are we talking about the remaining ARP dollars?
I'm talking about the remaining 28 million, roughly, ARP dollars.
And I think that that assessment of all of those facilities will be helpful for me, because I can say firsthand, I can see where various ones appear to be deteriorating for our very eyes, that, knowing about what are some where we just want to stabilize by roof replacement, even if it's not going to be open this, sort of coming cycle, so that way we don't lose the building entirely for multiple different purposes. If it's no longer going to be bathrooms, maybe it's pivots then to storage facilities or something like that. But Councilman?
But, we had talked about that assessment, but I'm not aware that we have actually, made that decision that there will be an assessment, and whether that's realized in the budget.
Mayor Grimal? I just thought you were about to.
I was literally just thinking the exact same thought, Councilwoman. So your point is well taken. I think one of the takeaways that all of us had from some of your thoughtful questions last week was that we do need to do a really comprehensive capital needs assessment and actually assign price tags to that. You and I talked a little bit about that earlier today as well, which is we have a parks master plan, but I don't think we have costs associated with some of those improvements. We know that we have a lot of deferred maintenance here at City Hall. There was some assessment, some degree of an assessment done on that in the past couple of years, but we want to review that. And so I think we do need to do a comprehensive facilities assessment that would include every city-owned building and city-owned property, parks included. But I don't think we've actually budgeted, or in our proposed budget, I don't think there are actually funds there specifically for that purpose. So that's something that we'll, in light of last week's discussion, want to bring forward to council.
We are closing in our time. We will be adjourning by 6:00 p.m. because there is a Planning Commission special meeting taking place in this space immediately thereafter. So we'll make our exit swiftly. This may have been addressed already, but in terms of the pilot project for speed humps, would that be under routine maintenance roads under the 202, where it says $500,000 for services contracted construction, or would it be shown somewhere else? I anticipate that would be a DPW.
Yes, although it could be in capital improvements potentially, but Mr. Carrington and Mr. Cooley, do you have some insight into exactly what line item that's in? I know we designated roughly $500,000 for it.
Yeah, it's capital improvement.
Okay. Other final questions or discussion as it relates to the various elements of Public Works and the proposed budget?
When do you want our speed hump locations? Can we send them now?
Might as well.
Thanks.
The tree services, we know that obviously that was redirected to handle mowing in the parks for the balance of this fiscal year. But if it's able to be briefly elaborated on, what does the tree maintenance look like in an ideal where we have professional service, tree services, is that handling right-of-way trees? Is that handling, public spaces in general? Or how does that manifest if everything is firing on all cylinders as you'd like it to?
There's a line item in each one of the different areas. So there's a line item specific to parks. There's a line item specific to major roads, local roads, where we do that tree cutting services. And it's pulled out of each one of those separate funds. Typically at this point in time, we don't have a trimming program going on. We just currently have a, if it's hanging over a roof or if the tree's dead or diseased, that it comes down. But it's something that we're looking to try to upgrade to a more of a trimming package.
Okay. Any further discussion? There were no requests for public comment at this meeting. The time is 5:56 p.m. And without objection from colleagues, can I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Support. Moved by Nicholson, seconded by Goodman. Hearing no discussion, roll call on adjournment. Clerk Doyle.
Ennis,
Yes.
Nicholson,
Yes.
Parker,
Yes.
Rutherford, Goodman,
Yes.
James.
Yes.
6 yeas, no nays.
That motion carries. We stand adjourned at 5:57 p.m. and we'll make our quick exit so that the Planning Commission can take their seats.